The main news of the last few days has been the strikes on Ukrainian territory, reported by Russian official sources and numerous eyewitnesses. On the night of August 24th, 72 Garan-2 drones and one Iskander-M ballistic missile were launched at various regions of Ukraine. The Ukrainian side acknowledged that the missile and at least 24 drones reached their targets in 10 regions of the country. This is confirmed by reports from residents who recorded powerful explosions and fires in Pavlograd, Poltava, Sumy, Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and other regions. According to eyewitnesses, a large fire broke out in the industrial zone of Pavlograd, with flames and thick smoke visible for dozens of kilometers. In the Sumy region, strikes hit the outskirts of Sumy, as well as areas where Ukrainian army units were located. In the Mykolaiv region, explosions were recorded twice near Ochakiv, after which a large number of ambulances left for the city. These events are taking place against the backdrop of reports of massive drone attacks on Russian regions. The Russian Ministry of Defense claims that in 6 hours, air defense forces managed to intercept 57 Ukrainian drones. The attack began at around 5 p.m. and continued until 11:30 p.m. The drones were shot down in the Bryansk, Kaluga, Smolensk, Kursk, Leningrad, Tver, Novgorod, Oryol, and Tambov regions. Several aircraft were spotted in the Moscow region and Chuvashia, as well as over the Black Sea. In the Bryansk region, the governor reported that 21 drones were shot down over his region alone. Against the backdrop of these reports, the situation in the Kherson region is escalating. Governor Vladimir Saldo said that the Ukrainian army has changed its tactics and is increasingly trying to carry out attacks not across the Dnieper, but using the Black Sea. According to him, landing attempts are taking place in the Kinburn and Tendrovskaya Spits. He claims that almost all such actions are being suppressed while still at sea. The Russian Ministry of Defense previously reported the prevention of sabotage in the Black Sea when a group of boats attempted to move towards Crimea. New loud statements are being made on the international stage. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov commented on the strike on the Flex factory in Mykolaiv in an interview with an American television channel. The Ukrainian side claimed that the plant was engaged in civilian production, including coffee machines. Lavrov sarcastically noted that it was naive to trust such statements, hinting that components for drones could have been manufactured undercover. He stressed that the presence of American capital does not make a facility immune if it is used for military purposes. However, at the end of the conversation, he added that he had never heard of this particular strike and only asked a rhetorical question about the admissibility of such attacks. According to Ukrainian authorities, the fire at the Flex factory took almost 3 days to extinguish. The media reported that the plant produced circuit boards and microprocessors that could be used in military equipment. The story was also covered on Russian television. These events became the focus of the news. On the one hand, mutual strikes and drone attacks continue. On the other hand, tensions are rising at the diplomatic level, where the role of foreign-owned companies and arms supplies are being discussed. Against this backdrop, international observers are reporting ongoing evacuations of civilians from areas where strikes are taking place, as well as reports of power and water outages. The events of the last few days cannot be viewed in isolation from the broader context. What is happening now on the front lines and in the rear is the result of a long confrontation involving not only Russia and Ukraine, but also major global players. The new strikes and drone attacks only underscore that the conflict is entering a new phase, where military actions are closely intertwined with political and economic decisions. The history of the conflict in recent years shows that each new round of escalation is accompanied not only by combat episodes, but also by diplomatic statements. In the case of the strike on the Flex plant in Mykolaiv, the issue goes far beyond a local attack. The Russian foreign minister emphasized that the presence of American investments cannot serve as a shield for a facility if it is involved in the military industry. This statement sounds like a warning that Russia is ready to consider facilities of international importance as targets if they are linked to the Ukrainian army. The situation in the Kherson region also illustrates a change in tactics. Attempts by the Ukrainian army to use the Black Sea to land sabotage groups demonstrate that classic attack routes across the Dnieper are becoming increasingly difficult to access. Reports of foiled landing attempts on the Kinburn and Tendra Spits confirm that this area is considered an important strategic bridgehead. Further escalation is possible in this direction, as control of the Black Sea is of key importance to both sides. Drone attacks on Russian regions add another dimension to this conflict. According to official data, in one evening, the Russian air defense system detected more than 50 drones in different areas of the country, including the central and northwestern regions. For the first time, such large-scale raids were recorded simultaneously in the Bryansk, Leningrad, and Moscow regions. For Russian citizens, this was a reminder that military operations affect not only the front lines but also the interior regions. For Ukraine, it is a way to show that the war is not limited to its territory. The international community has reacted to this news in different ways. Western media outlets have widely covered the strikes on Ukraine, focusing more on the humanitarian consequences and destruction. Russian sources emphasize the attacks that have been prevented and statements about the involvement of Western companies in supplying the Ukrainian army. This division of information underscores that the war is being fought not only on the ground, but also in the media. At the same time, the debate over arms supplies continues. The Trump administration's decision to approve the transfer of more than 3,000 long-range guided missiles to Ukraine is perceived in Moscow as a threat of direct NATO involvement in the conflict. European countries are bearing the brunt of the costs, which is already causing tension among their citizens. In some countries, there is growing discontent that billions of dollars and euros are being spent on military needs instead of solving domestic problems. At the same time, governments insist that support for Ukraine is necessary to contain Russia. The hidden motives behind these decisions may be deeper than they appear. For the United States, it is not only a question of geopolitics, but also of strengthening its own military companies, which are receiving multi-billion-dollar contracts. For Europe, arms supplies are becoming an element of political solidarity and a demonstration of unity in the face of a threat. For Ukraine, it is a chance to hold its ground and show its citizens that the West is not abandoning it. Within Ukraine itself, intense work with the public continues. Reports of power outages, evacuations, and destruction are becoming part of everyday life. The authorities are calling for calm and trust in official reports. However, the abundance of eyewitness accounts on social media is creating a parallel reality where very different assessments of what is happening are often heard. Thus, the political and informational background of the conflict is no less tense than the fighting itself. Strikes on targets, international statements, and economic decisions paint a picture in which every action has multiple consequences. For viewers, it is like a suspenseful TV series where each new episode is layered with previous events and intrigues. Analyzing the events of the last few days, it becomes clear that the conflict is not just continuing, but gaining momentum. Large-scale drone strikes and the use of long-range missiles show that the sides are testing each other's limits. Each new clash signals a readiness for further escalation. It is important to understand that in this situation, even a single incident can trigger a chain of reactions that could change the entire course of the conflict. Military analysts note that the simultaneous use of more than 70 Garand-2 drones is a demonstration of the ability to put pressure on Ukraine's air defense systems. Even if some of the drones are intercepted, the sheer number of them forces the use of significant ammunition reserves to destroy them. The simultaneous launch of an Iskander M ballistic missile in combination with drones appeared to be an attempt to distract attention and overload defense systems. For Ukraine, this was a challenge, and for Russia, it was a test of the effectiveness of its new tactics. On the other hand, Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian regions indicate that Ukraine is seeking to demonstrate its ability to strike deep into enemy territory. The scale of the raids in the Bryansk, Moscow, and Leningrad regions indicates the availability of resources and technical support. This in turn raises questions about the extent to which Western technology and specialists play a role in facilitating such attacks. Moscow insists that such operations are impossible without outside help. Looking ahead, analysts highlight several scenarios. The first scenario involves a gradual escalation of strikes on both sides. This would lead to further destruction of infrastructure and an increase in the number of evacuated residents. For the civilian population, this means continued harsh living conditions with power and water outages and constant alerts. The second scenario assumes that one side will try to gain a local advantage on the front by changing tactics. Attempts by the Ukrainian army to use the Black Sea for diversionary operations could be part of a larger plan to create new areas of pressure. Russia, for its part, could intensify strikes on military industry targets in western Ukraine to reduce the flow of equipment to the front line. The third scenario involves diplomacy. In recent days, rumors have intensified about a possible expansion of the role of certain NATO countries, including Canada, where the Prime Minister has raised the possibility of sending peacekeepers. So far, these are only statements, but the very possibility of their implementation adds to the tension. Moscow perceives such proposals as a threat of direct confrontation. If such initiatives are pursued, the conflict could enter a completely different phase. The political backdrop also plays a huge role. The Trump administration's decision to supply Ukraine with longer-range missiles is already being called a turning point. In Europe, disputes continue over the distribution of the financial burden. Within European countries themselves, there are increasingly loud voices saying that such expenditures undermine the social sphere and the economy. Against this backdrop, public fatigue is growing, which could lead to political crises and a change in government positions. An important element of the analysis is related to the information war. Russian and Ukrainian sources present events from different angles, forming opposing pictures of what is happening. For the viewer, this creates an atmosphere of uncertainty in which the credibility of every report is called into question. Nevertheless, the facts remain clear. The strikes are becoming larger in scale, the geography is expanding, and the consequences are being felt far beyond the front lines. That is why international experts warn that the coming weeks will be decisive. The conflict is at a point where any decision could mark the start of a new phase. If the sides continue to escalate, this will have unpredictable consequences for the region and the entire world. The situation on and around the front lines today looks like one of the most tense in recent months. Large-scale night strikes on Ukraine, massive drone attacks on Russian regions, announcements of new arms deliveries, and diplomatic comments by world leaders paint a picture where each event is closely linked to another. The conflict is developing as a sequence of steps, in which each side has its own motives and goals, but there is no willingness to compromise. The main outcome of the last few days is that the war has entered a phase where strikes and attacks are being carried out not only on the line of contact, but also deep inside the territories. This means that neither side feels completely safe anymore. For Ukraine, this is reflected in power outages, evacuations, and constant attacks on industrial areas. For Russia, it means having to defend dozens of regions from drone strikes. Diplomatic statements are adding to the tension. In a conversation with American journalists, the Russian foreign minister hinted at the possibility of strikes on foreign-owned facilities if they are used in the interests of the Ukrainian army. This sparked widespread debate in the international media. In the United States, meanwhile, debate continues over the decision to supply missiles with an extended range. In Europe, the issue of financial burdens is becoming increasingly painful. Thus, military action is directly influencing the domestic politics of the leading powers. Looking at the forecasts, 3 possible scenarios can be identified. The first is that the current dynamics will continue with a gradual increase in the intensity of the strikes. This will lead to further destruction of infrastructure and a deterioration of the humanitarian situation. The second is a sharp escalation with the involvement of new players, which could turn a local conflict into an international crisis. The third is attempts at diplomatic pressure, which will intensify as Western societies grow weary of military spending. However, the likelihood of a quick end to the fighting remains minimal. The information background is heightening anxiety. Reports of explosions, photos, and videos from eyewitnesses are spreading instantly, creating an atmosphere of constant threat. For viewers around the world, it looks like an endless TV series, with each new episode bringing more disturbing images. But unlike a fictional scenario, this is about real lives and destinies. The outcome is clear. The conflict has entered a phase where the consequences of every decision extend far beyond the region. New arms deliveries, strikes on industrial facilities, and diplomatic statements are forming a chain of events whose outcome is difficult to predict. International organizations continue to call for negotiations, but so far these calls have gone unanswered.